The autumn sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Harmony Springs, Arizona Territory, as tensions reached a breaking point that would change the small frontier town forever. It was October 15, 1888, and the third consecutive year of drought had pushed many ranchers and farmers to the edge of financial ruin. 34-year-old Catherine Kate Brennan stood defiantly on the front porch of her modest homestead, facing down a group of 5 men who had come to deliver what they claimed was justice. Kate was a widow who had been struggling to maintain her late husband's small ranch with the help of hired hands and sheer determination. But recent accusations had turned many townspeople against her. "Mrs. Brennan," said Sheriff Tom Bradley, his weathered face showing reluctance for the task at hand, "you need to come with us. There are serious charges that need to be addressed." Kate's jaw tightened as she looked at the men assembled in her yard. Besides the sheriff, there was banker Franklin Moore, whose attempts to foreclose on several properties had been mysteriously thwarted. Merchant William Harrison, whose store had been burglarized twice in recent months, rancher Big Jim Patterson, who had lost cattle to rustlers, and Judge Henry Walsh, whose stern expression suggested he had already reached his verdict. "What charges, exactly?" Kate asked, her Irish accent still evident after 15 years in America. "Cattle rustling, theft, and conspiracy to defraud honest businessmen," Judge Walsh replied. "Multiple witnesses have come forward with evidence of your involvement in criminal activities." Kate's 10-year-old son, Timothy, emerged from behind her, his young face showing fear, but also determination to stand by his mother. Timothy had the same red hair and green eyes as Kate, but his features carried hints of his father's strong jawline and steady gaze. "My mother hasn't done anything wrong," Timothy said with the courage that often comes naturally to children defending their families. "Son," Sheriff Bradley said gently, "this is adult business. Why don't you go inside while we sort this out?" "I'm not leaving my mother," Timothy replied firmly. Kate placed a protective hand on Timothy's shoulder. "The boy can stay. I have nothing to hide from him or anyone else." Franklin Moore stepped forward, consulting a piece of paper. "Mrs. Brennan, 3 separate witnesses have identified you as the woman they saw near Patterson's cattle the night 20 head went missing. You were also seen leaving Harrison's store on both nights. It was burglarized. Witnesses can be mistaken," Kate replied evenly, "or they can be lying." "Are you calling respected members of this community liars?" Judge Walsh demanded. "I'm saying that sometimes people see what they want to see, especially when they're looking for someone to blame for their troubles." The accusation hit closer to the truth than anyone realized. Kate Brennan had indeed been involved in the activities she was accused of, but not in the way the townspeople imagined. For the past year, she had been secretly helping struggling families redistributing cattle from wealthy ranchers to feed starving children, taking food from merchants who were hoarding supplies during the drought, and forging loan documents to prevent foreclosures. But Kate's real secret was something else entirely, something that connected her to this town and these people in ways none of them knew. "Timothy," Kate said quietly, "go get my jewelry box from the bedroom. The one with the blue ribbon." Timothy looked confused, but obeyed, disappearing into the house. While he was gone, the tension in the yard continued to build. "Mrs. Brennan," Sheriff Bradley said, "if you come peacefully, things will go easier. For you, fighting this will only make it worse for your boy." Kate studied the faces of the men who had come to arrest her, seeing fear, anger, and desperation, but also something else, a hunger for justice that had been misdirected toward her, because the real problems facing their community seemed too large to solve. Timothy returned with a small wooden box tied with a faded blue ribbon. Kate took it from him and held it for a moment, then made a decision that would change everything. "Timothy," she said, "I want you to take this letter." She removed a yellowed envelope from the box. "And I want you to put it in Judge Walsh's coat pocket when he's not looking. Can you do that for me?" Timothy looked at the envelope, which was addressed in his mother's handwriting to someone named Henry Walsh, and bore a date from 15 years earlier. "What's in the letter, Mama? Something that might help these men understand who I really am." Kate replied cryptically, as the adults continued their tense standoff. Timothy moved with the stealth that children master when they're trying to accomplish important tasks without being noticed. Judge Walsh had removed his coat and hung it on his saddle horn while he consulted with the other men, and Timothy was able to slip the letter into the coat pocket without being seen. "Mrs. Brennan," Judge Walsh said, putting his coat back on, "you have 1 minute to gather your personal effects. You're coming with us to face these charges." Kate looked at Timothy with eyes that mixed love, regret, and determination. "Timothy, I want you to stay with Mrs. Henderson until this is sorted out. Be a good boy, and remember everything I've taught you about right and wrong." "Mama, I don't understand what's happening." "You will, son. When Judge Walsh reads that letter, you'll understand everything." As Kate was escorted away by the sheriff and his posse, Timothy watched from the porch with tears streaming down his face. He didn't understand why his mother had wanted him to hide a letter in the judge's pocket, but he trusted that she had a reason for everything she did. What Timothy didn't know was that the letter he had hidden contained a secret that would not only exonerate his mother, but reveal a connection between Kate Brennan and Judge Henry Walsh that dated back to before Timothy was born, a connection that explained everything about why Kate had chosen to help struggling families and why she had been willing to risk everything to do what she thought was right. The letter would also reveal why Kate had come to Harmony Springs in the first place, and why she had been living under a name that wasn't entirely her own for the past 15 years. As evening fell over the Arizona Territory, Judge Walsh reached into his coat pocket for his pipe and discovered an envelope that would change his understanding of justice, family, and the complex reasons why good people sometimes break bad laws. That evening, Judge Henry Walsh sat in his study, reviewing the evidence against Kate Brennan and preparing for what he expected to be a straightforward trial. At 61, he had presided over hundreds of cases and prided himself on his ability to distinguish between guilt and innocence based on facts rather than emotions. As he reached for his pipe, his fingers encountered the unexpected envelope in his coat pocket. Puzzled, he withdrew it and was shocked to see his own name written in handwriting he recognized but hadn't seen in 15 years. The envelope was addressed to Henry Walsh and dated June 15, 1873, 15 years ago, when he had been a young lawyer in Philadelphia, before he had come west to seek his fortune and eventually become a territorial judge. With trembling hands, Henry opened the envelope and began to read. "My dearest Henry, by the time you read this letter, I will be gone. I cannot bear to tell you in person what I must tell you in writing, because I know that seeing your face when you learn the truth would break what remains of my heart. I am with child, Henry, our child, the child we created during those beautiful months when we thought we could overcome the differences between your family's expectations and my humble origins." Henry felt the room spinning around him as memories he had tried to bury came flooding back. Catherine O'Brien, the Irish immigrant girl who had worked as a seamstress in his father's household, the woman he had fallen desperately in love with, despite his family's horrified opposition to their relationship. "I know your family will never accept me as your wife, and I know that marrying me would destroy your political ambitions and your father's business interests. So I am removing myself from your life before you are forced to choose between love and duty. I am traveling west to make a new life for myself and our child. I will take the name Brennan, my grandmother's maiden name, so that no scandal will touch your family. You will be free to marry someone suitable and build the distinguished career your father has planned for you." Henry's hands shook as he continued reading. Catherine O'Brien, the woman he had searched for frantically 15 years ago before finally giving up and convincing himself that she had simply decided their love wasn't worth fighting for. "Please don't try to find me, Henry. I release you from any obligation you might feel, and I pray that you will find happiness with someone who can give you the respectable life you deserve. Know that I will love you always, and that our child will grow up knowing that their father was a good and honorable man, even if they never know his name. Forever yours, Catherine. P.S. If God is kind, perhaps someday we will meet again under circumstances that allow us to remember only the love we shared, not the pain of our parting." Henry set the letter down with hands that couldn't seem to stop trembling. Catherine O'Brien, Kate Brennan, the woman he had been about to convict for theft and cattle rustling, was the woman he had loved more than life itself 15 years ago. And the boy who had stood so protectively beside her was his own son, Timothy, the red-haired, green-eyed boy who had looked at him with such defiance was his child, the child Catherine had carried away to protect Henry's reputation and future. Henry's mind raced as he considered the implications. Catherine Kate had been living in his own territory for years, struggling to raise their son alone while he had built the distinguished career she had sacrificed to make possible. And now he had been prepared to destroy her for crimes that, if she had committed them, were likely motivated by desperation to provide for the child she was raising without support. But more than that, Henry began to reconsider the evidence against Kate with new eyes. The cattle rustling charges came from Big Jim Patterson, who was known for his harsh treatment of struggling smaller ranchers. The theft charges came from William Harrison, who had been hoarding food supplies during the drought while families went hungry. The loan fraud accusations came from Franklin Moore, who had been systematically foreclosing on properties to expand his own holdings. What if Kate hadn't been committing crimes for personal gain? What if she had been trying to correct injustices, helping starving families, preventing unfair foreclosures, redistributing resources from those who hoarded them to those who desperately needed them? Henry thought about his own comfortable life, his successful career, his respected position in the community, all built on the foundation of Catherine's sacrifice. She had given up everything so that he could become Judge Henry Walsh, pillar of the community and dispenser of justice. And now, ironically, he was being asked to dispense justice on the woman who had made his success possible, and the son he had never known existed. Henry spent the rest of the night walking the floor of his study, wrestling with questions that had no easy answers. By morning, he had made a decision that would surprise everyone involved in Kate Brennan's case, including Kate herself. The trial was scheduled to begin at 10 o'clock, and the entire town was expected to attend. But Judge Henry Walsh had a few questions of his own to ask before any testimony was heard. As dawn broke over Harmony Springs, Henry prepared for the most important day of his judicial career, not because of the legal precedents that might be set, but because of the personal reckonings that needed to happen. In the town jail, Kate sat quietly in her cell, wondering if Timothy had managed to deliver the letter and if Henry would understand why she had never contacted him in 15 years. She had followed his career from a distance, reading about his appointments and achievements in newspaper accounts, and had been proud of the man he had become even as she struggled to raise their son alone. Now, facing the possibility of imprisonment or worse, Kate's only hope was that the man she had loved 15 years ago would recognize the justice in what she had been trying to accomplish, even if the methods she had used weren't strictly legal. The letter had been her final gambit, a desperate attempt to make Henry understand not just who she was, but why she had made the choices that had led to this moment. Soon, the entire town would discover that their respected judge and the accused cattle rustler shared a past that would change everyone's understanding of justice, love, and the complicated reasons why people sometimes risk everything to do what they believe is right. The courthouse in Harmony Springs had never seen such a crowd. Word had spread throughout the territory that the trial of Kate Brennan, the widow accused of cattle rustling and theft, would finally bring justice to the community's recent troubles. Ranchers, merchants, farmers, and townspeople packed the small building, eager to see the woman they blamed for their misfortunes receive her punishment. Judge Henry Walsh entered the courtroom with the weight of 15 years of separation and a lifetime of difficult decisions pressing on his shoulders. He had spent the night wrestling with his conscience, and now he faced the challenge of dispensing justice. While navigating the most personal conflict of his career, "This court is now in session," Henry announced, his voice carrying the authority that had made him one of the most respected judges in the territory. Kate sat at the defendant's table, her dignity intact despite her circumstances. She looked directly at Henry, and for a moment, their eyes met with an intensity that spoke of shared history and unresolved emotions. Timothy sat in the front row, with Mrs. Henderson, watching the proceedings with the serious attention of a child who understood that his mother's life hung in the balance. "Before we hear testimony," Henry said, "I want to address some irregularities in this case that have come to my attention. The crowded courtroom stirred with curiosity. Prosecutor James Mitchell looked surprised, as did the witnesses who had come to testify against Kate. "Mr. Patterson," Henry addressed the rancher, "you claim that Mrs. Brennan stole 20 head of cattle from your ranch. Can you tell this court how many cattle you currently own?" Big Jim Patterson shifted uncomfortably. "I don't see how that's relevant, Your Honor. Answer the question. About 800 head. And can you tell this court how many families in this area have children who have gone to bed hungry in the past month due to the drought and economic hardship?" Prosecutor Mitchell stood up. "Your Honor, I object. The defendant's motives don't change the fact that theft is theft." Overruled. "Mr. Patterson, please answer the question." Patterson looked round the courtroom, realizing that Henry was steering the trial in an unexpected direction. I wouldn't know about other families' situations, Mrs. Henderson," Henry called out. "As someone who works with the church relief efforts, can you answer that question?" Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who had helped organize community aid during the drought, stood up nervously. "Your Honor, at least 15 families in this area have children who haven't had adequate food in weeks. We've been trying to organize relief, but resources are limited." Henry nodded and turned to William Harrison. "Mr. Harrison, you've accused Mrs. Brennan of stealing food from your store. Can you tell this court how much food you currently have in storage?" Harrison's face reddened. "Your Honor, I have to maintain adequate inventory." "How much food?" "Mr. Harrison, enough to last the winter for probably 50 families. And yet you've been selling food at inflated prices while families go hungry." "I have to make a profit to stay in business." A murmur of discontent rippled through the courtroom as people began to understand the direction of Henry's questioning. "Your Honor," Prosecutor Mitchell interjected again, "while these questions may be interesting, they don't address the central issue of whether Mrs. Brennan committed the crimes she's accused of." Henry looked directly at Kate. "Mrs. Brennan, did you take cattle from Mr. Patterson's ranch?" Kate stood up, her voice clear and steady. "Yes, Your Honor, I took 20 head of cattle." The courtroom erupted in surprised chatter. They had expected her to deny the charges, not confess to them openly. "And did you take food from Mr. Harrison's store?" "Yes, Your Honor, on 2 occasions." "And did you forge documents related to bank loans?" "Yes, Your Honor. I forged 3 loan documents to prevent foreclosures." Henry raised his hand for silence. "Mrs. Brennan, why did you commit these acts?" Kate looked around the courtroom, seeing the faces of people she had secretly helped and others who had condemned her without understanding her motives. "Because children were starving while cattle grazed in fields owned by men who had more than they needed. Because families were losing their homes to a banker who was more interested in acquiring land than helping people survive a drought. Because sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing. So you took it upon yourself to redistribute resources?" "I took it upon myself to do what I thought was right, knowing that I might pay a price for it." Henry was quiet for a moment, and then he made a decision that would shock everyone in the courtroom. "Mrs. Brennan, I find you guilty of the charges against you. However, I sentence you to community service. Specifically, I'm appointing you as the official coordinator of drought relief efforts for this territory. You will work with local churches, ranchers, and merchants to establish a fair distribution system for food and resources." During times of hardship, the courtroom exploded in confused chatter. Some people cheered, others protested, and many simply stared in bewilderment. Furthermore, Henry continued, raising his voice above the noise, "Mr. Patterson, Mr. Harrison, and Mr. Moore, you are ordered to contribute 10% of your assets to a community relief fund that Mrs. Brennan will oversee. If you refuse, you will face charges of conspiracy to create public hardship during a time of emergency." "You can't do that," Franklin Moore protested. "I can, and I have. This territory's laws include provisions for emergency resource allocation during times of crisis." As the courtroom slowly emptied, with people arguing about the unprecedented ruling, Henry approached Kate at the defendant's table. "Mrs. Brennan," he said formally, "I'd like to speak with you privately in my chambers." Kate nodded, understanding that their real conversation was only beginning. As they walked toward Henry's office, Timothy approached them both. "Mama," he said, "I did what you asked me to do with the letter." Henry knelt down to Timothy's level. Seeing his own eyes reflected in the boy's face, "You did exactly right. Son, your mother asked you to deliver something very important, and you made sure it got where it needed to go." For the first time, Timothy looked at Judge Walsh with something other than fear or defiance. There was something familiar about the way the judge looked at him, something that reminded him of looking in a mirror. "Come along, Timothy," Kate said softly. "Judge Walsh and I have some things to discuss, and I think it's time you learned about some family history." As the three of them entered Henry's chambers, the people of Harmony Springs were left to grapple with the fact that their understanding of justice, family, and community had just been turned upside down by a letter hidden in a coat pocket and the courage of people willing to risk everything for what they believed was right. 6 months after the trial that had transformed Harmony Springs, the small territorial town bore little resemblance to the drought-stricken, desperate community it had been. Under Kate Brennan's leadership, the emergency relief program had not only addressed the immediate crisis, but had created sustainable systems for community cooperation that benefited everyone. The program had been so successful that territorial officials were considering implementing similar systems throughout Arizona and New Mexico, with Kate being asked to oversee the expansion as a paid territorial position. On this particular spring morning, Kate stood in the garden behind the house she now shared with Henry Walsh, Judge Henry Walsh, who had become not just her husband, but her partner in creating a more just and compassionate community. Timothy, now 11 years old and officially Timothy Walsh, was helping Henry repair a fence while discussing the mathematics involved in calculating proper post spacing. The boy had blossomed under his father's attention and guidance, though he maintained the strong moral compass his mother had instilled in him during their years alone. "Timothy," Henry called out, "can you calculate how many posts we'll need for the remaining 100 feet of fence?" Timothy studied the problem seriously. "If we're spacing them 8 feet apart, we'll need 12.5 posts. But since we can't use half a post, we'll need 13 posts total." "Exactly right. And what principle are you applying?" "Always round up when planning materials, because it's better to have too much than too little." Henry smiled at his sons. "Practical wisdom. That's a principle that applies to more than just fence building." Kate watched this interaction with deep satisfaction. The reunion between Henry and Timothy had been gradual and careful, allowing the boy to adjust to having a father while Henry learned to be a parent. But the bond between them had grown strong, built on mutual respect and shared interests in books, mathematics, and questions of justice. Mrs. Walsh called out Margaret Henderson, approaching the garden gate. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Mrs. Henderson. What brings you by?" "I wanted to update you on the winter relief planning. The contributions from the Merchant and Rancher Assessment Fund have exceeded our projections, and we're in a position to help even more families than we anticipated." Kate wiped her hands on her apron and joined Mrs. Henderson at the gate. The older woman had become Kate's chief assistant in managing the relief programs, bringing decades of community knowledge and organizational skills to the effort. "Any resistance from the contributors?" Mrs. Henderson smiled. "Actually, no. Mr. Patterson told me yesterday that the community cooperation has been good for his business. He's selling more cattle at fair prices than he ever did hoarding them. And Mr. Harrison says his store profits are higher with steady, fair-priced sales than they were with price gouging. And Mr. Moore, the banker, has discovered that helping people keep their property is actually more profitable than foreclosing and trying to manage numerous properties himself." Kate nodded with satisfaction. Sometimes people need to be shown that doing good and doing well aren't contradictory. That evening, as the Walsh family gathered for dinner, Henry shared news that would affect all their futures. "I received a letter from the territorial governor today," Henry announced as Kate served Timothy his favorite cornbread. "He's offering me a position as Chief Justice for the Arizona Territory." Timothy looked up with excitement. "Does that mean we'd move to Phoenix?" "It would mean that I'd need to travel frequently, and we might eventually relocate. But before I make any decision, I need to know how you both feel about it." Kate set down the serving bowl and considered the implications. "It would be a significant opportunity for you, Henry. Chief Justice is a position where you could implement the kind of justice reforms we've proven work here in Harmony Springs, but it would also mean leaving the community we've built together. Timothy spoke up with the directness that both his parents had learned to respect. Papa, if you became Chief Justice, could you make sure other places have relief programs like ours? Possibly. Why do you ask? Because Mama always taught me that when you have the power to help people, you have the responsibility to use it. If you can help more people as Chief Justice than you can help as a regular judge, then maybe that's what you should do. Henry looked at his son with profound pride. That's very wise thinking, Timothy. I learned it from Mama. She always said that doing the right thing isn't about what's easy or comfortable. It's about what helps the most people. Kate felt tears prick her eyes as she listened to her son articulate the values she had tried to teach him during their difficult years alone. There's something else, Henry continued. The governor has also asked Kate to serve as the territorial coordinator for community relief and resource management. It would be a formal government position with a substantial salary and the authority to implement relief programs throughout the territory. Kate was quiet for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of the opportunity. Would we be working together? We would be working on related but separate initiatives. I would focus on legal reforms and fair enforcement, while you would focus on proactive community support and resource distribution. That night, after Timothy had gone to bed, Kate and Henry sat on their front porch, discussing the future that was opening before them. 15 years ago, Kate said, I left Philadelphia because I thought your career and my love for you couldn't coexist. And now I'm discovering that our love for each other and our commitment to justice aren't contradictory there. Complementary. Henry took her hand. Do you regret the years we lost? Kate considered the question seriously. I regret the pain we both experienced, but I don't regret the experiences that shaped us into the people we are today. If we had married 15 years ago, we might never have learned what we've learned about justice, community, and the responsibility that comes with privilege. And Timothy has become a remarkable young man partly because he learned early that life isn't always fair, but that doesn't mean we stop fighting to make it better. 3 months later, the Walsh family moved to Phoenix, where Henry began his tenure as Chief Justice and Kate established the Territorial Relief and Resource Management Office. Timothy enrolled in a school that challenged his intellect while allowing him to maintain the practical skills and moral grounding his parents valued. From Phoenix, they implemented programs based on the Harmony Springs model throughout Arizona and New Mexico territories. Kate's innovative approaches to community resource sharing became a model studied by reformers throughout the American West. But perhaps more importantly, they had proven that love deferred isn't necessarily love denied. Sometimes it's love deepened by experience, strengthened by shared values, and made more precious by the understanding of what really matters. The letter that Timothy had hidden in a coat pocket had revealed more than just a shared past. It had uncovered a shared vision of justice that would influence territorial policy for generations and create a family stronger for having been tested by separation and reunited by truth. Years later, when Timothy became a lawyer himself, he would carry forward his parents' conviction that the law should serve justice, not just order, and that the most important inheritance parents can give their children isn't wealth or position, but the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult. The widow's courage to risk everything for what she believed in had not only saved her community, but had restored a love that had never truly died, proving that sometimes the most profound victories come to those who are willing to lose everything in service of something larger than themselves.